After Sarah's death, the world thought Abraham's story had ended, but God was not finished. In the stillness of his old age, a mysterious woman named Keturah stepped into his life. And through her, a hidden chapter of destiny began. Few remember her name, yet her sons would shape nations and echo Abraham's promise across the ancient world. Stay with me till the end of this video, because what happened after Sarah is a part of the covenant most people have never heard. The winds of Hebron were quieter now. Once, the tents of Abraham had echoed with laughter, the voice of Sarah, the cries of Isaac as a child, the songs of servants who watched a miracle unfold. But the years had passed, and the laughter had faded. The woman who had shared his journey from Ur to Canaan, from barrenness to blessing, was gone, and Abraham, the friend of God, walked through the silence of his twilight years with only memories as his companions. He was old now, 170 years behind him, each step marked by faith and fire. He had seen mountains blaze with promise, altar soaked with tears, and the heavens count his descendants in stars. Yet even for a man who had spoken with the Almighty, the ache of human loneliness was not foreign. Sarah's tent stood still at the edge of the camp, her garments folded, her perfume long faded. Each evening, Abraham would sit at the doorway, his gaze drifting toward the horizon, watching the sunset over the hills of Canaan, the land promised to his seed. The covenant was sure, the blessing sealed. But the house felt empty. Days turned into seasons. Isaac was now grown, married to Rebekah, living in another camp far to the south. The young carried their own burdens, their own joys. Abraham's heart rejoiced in them, but still solitude lingered like the night mist. He often wondered if the final stretch of his journey would be spent in silence, waiting for the day when he would be gathered to his fathers. But God, who had written miracles upon the pages of his life, was not finished yet. One evening, as the orange glow of dusk softened the tents, Abraham noticed a woman among the servants. Her movements were graceful, her countenance calm. A quiet dignity rested upon her like a veil. Her name was Keturah. Unlike the beauty of youth that fades quickly, hers was the beauty of peace, the serenity of a heart at rest. Her eyes carried wisdom and kindness, and her hands worked with steady devotion. In her presence, the old patriarch felt something stir again, not the passion of youth, but the warmth of companionship, a gentle light kindling in the twilight of his years. Perhaps it was the memory of God's promise that stirred him, that he would yet be the father of many nations. Perhaps it was simply mercy, reaching out to a weary heart. But one morning, Abraham sent for her. He spoke not as a man chasing youth, but as a man who had walked long enough to recognize when the Lord had brought peace to his tent again. And so it was that Abraham took Keturah as his wife. The union was quiet, without the thunder of prophecy or the laughter of miracles, yet it was sacred. In her presence, Abraham found rest from the storms that had shaped his life. Keturah became a gentle flame beside him, faithful, nurturing, honoring the man whose name the nations revered. Days that once felt heavy now moved with rhythm again. Her laughter mingled with the wind. Her presence softened the air of the camp. For the first time since Sarah's passing, Abraham smiled often. He spoke again of God's faithfulness, not from the mountaintops of testing, but from the still valleys of peace. In the evenings, Keturah would sit near him. He recounted the stories of his youth, the call from Ur, the long journey through barren lands, the voice of God beneath the stars. She listened, not merely to the man's words, but to the heartbeat of a covenant she had come to revere. And when Abraham spoke of Sarah, Keturah did not shrink in jealousy. She honored the woman who had walked before her, understanding that love, when sanctified by purpose, leaves no room for rivalry. As the months passed, a new wonder unfolded. Even in his old age, Abraham's tent was once again filled with the cries of newborns. Keturah bore him sons, one after another, each a living testimony that the blessing had not run dry. The God who had opened Sarah's womb and her barrenness now filled Keturah's with abundance, and Abraham, the aged patriarch, held each child with trembling hands and grateful tears. Life had returned to his household. The promise that he would be the father of many nations was blossoming before his eyes. The camp buzzed with renewed purpose. Servants hurried, flocks multiplied, laughter returned. Abraham's eyes, though dim with age, gleamed with the same light that once looked upon the stars of heaven. For he knew, this too was the hand of God. A different chapter, but the same faithful author. And when night fell, Abraham would look toward the heavens once more, not as a man longing for what was lost, but as one who had learned that God's story never ends with sorrow. Through Keturah, he saw that even after loss, there can be renewal. Even after silence, a song can rise again, for the promises of God are not buried with the dead. They live on, breathing through new hearts, new names, and new beginnings. Morning broke gently over the hills of Hebron. The first rays of light stretched across the tents, and the sound of sheep stirred the silence. In the heart of Abraham's camp, new life was blooming. Laughter, children's cries, and the fragrance of fresh bread baking in the fire pits. And at the center of it all stood Keturah, the woman who had breathed warmth into an old patriarch's twilight. She moved among the tents with quiet confidence, neither seeking attention nor needing it. Her hands were busy, her heart steadfast. She cared for Abraham not as one captivated by his wealth or fame, but with reverence for the faith that defined him. She was no stranger to hardship. Life in the ancient wilderness demanded endurance, yet there was a serenity about her, as though she understood that the God who watched over Abraham now watched over her. Calmer Abraham, now well past the years of human strength, watched Keturah with silent gratitude. Her presence reminded him of the God who restores, who renews what time has taken. The lines on his face told of battles fought and promises kept, but his eyes still carried that same gleam, the look of a man who had walked with the eternal. In those early days of their union, Abraham spoke often to her about the Lord, the one who had called him out of Ur, who had made him a promise under the open sky. Keturah listened, her heart softening with each word. She had heard stories of this God before, the one who had split the sea of barrenness for Sarah and made nations from a single covenant child. But now, through her own life, she saw his faithfulness unfolding again. Abraham had believed that his days of fatherhood were behind him, yet the God who formed life from dust whispered again into the soil of his old age. One by one, Keturah bore him sons: Zimran, Jokshan, Madon, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuah, 6 bright flames born from a heart that had already seen so many miracles. Each birth was a celebration, not merely of life, but of divine continuation. When the first child was born, the camp erupted in joy. Servants danced, women sang, and Abraham lifted the infant in trembling arms, blessing the Lord who gives life and breath to all things. And as he gazed upon the child's face, his mind drifted back to that long ago night, when God told him his descendants would outnumber the stars. Calmer now, beneath those same stars, another promise was being fulfilled. Keturah cherished her sons with quiet devotion. She raised them with respect for their father's God, teaching them to honor the covenant that rested upon their house. Though her children would not inherit the same covenant blessing given to Isaac, she taught them that every life born under Abraham's tent was touched by divine mercy. She understood her place, not in comparison, but in purpose. Where others might have sought position, she sought peace. Where others might have felt overshadowed by Sarah's legacy, Keturah found beauty in being part of God's ongoing plan. The years passed gently. Abraham, though aged, grew stronger in spirit. In the evenings, he would sit outside his tent while Keturah prepared a meal, and together they would watch their children play among the flocks. He would tell her how God had once tested him on Mount Moriah, how faith sometimes walks on the edge of a knife. She would listen, her eyes full of awe, her heart full of wonder. In those moments, she realized that love was not always born from youth or passion. Sometimes it blooms in the soil of understanding and faith. Abraham's love for Keturah was not fiery or loud, but steady and sacred. She was his companion in peace, the calm after the storm, the melody after the thunder of years. The camp began to change around them. New tents rose, children learned the ways of shepherding, and traders from distant lands stopped by to pay respects to the great patriarch. They would look upon Keturah, poised, graceful, and radiant, and see not merely a wife, but a living sign that the God of Abraham had not forgotten his servant. Sometimes, when the night grew still, Abraham would lift his hands toward the heavens and pray, "Lord, you who called me from nothing, who gave me promise and peace, you have dealt kindly with me. In my youth you gave me faith, and in my age you have given me rest. Blessed be your name forever." And beside him, Keturah would bow her head, her lips whispering a quiet amen. In her humility, she became part of something far larger than herself. The Lord had written her name into the legacy of Abraham, not through fame, but through faithfulness. Her sons would grow and spread eastward, carrying with them the strength of their father's blood and the wisdom of their mother's peace. But for now, in the stillness of Hebron's golden evenings, Keturah and Abraham lived simply, to souls bound not just by affection, but by divine timing. Their story was not one of fiery beginnings, but of enduring grace. And as the sun sank behind the hills, the patriarch's camp glowed with the soft light of promise, proof that even in the autumn of life, God can still bring forth spring. Time flowed gently through the years that followed. Abraham's camp, once the dwelling of an aging patriarch, now teemed with the rhythm of life. Children's laughter rose above the lowing of cattle and the bleating of sheep. The desert air carried songs of women grinding grain, and the fragrance of roasted lamb drifted from the fires. Where there had once been silence, there was now music, the melody of legacy being born. Keturah's sons had grown strong. Zimran, swift and bold, loved the desert winds and became a man of trade, his caravans stretching across the wilderness toward the Red Sea. Jokshan, wise and deliberate, fathered Sheba and Dedan, names that would one day echo through the markets of gold and spice. Madon, quiet but fierce, led his people toward the rocky valleys beyond Edom. Carmel, Midian, the most prominent of them all, grew into a leader whose descendants would inhabit the lands east of the Jordan, a people of strength and skill, whose tents would later be known among the tribes of the earth. Ishbak and Shur settled farther south, founding settlements that bridged the trade routes between Egypt and Arabia. From Keturah's womb came not just sons, but nations, threads that would weave across the tapestry of ancient civilization. They were called the Sons of the East, and their names carried the echo of Abraham's blessing, stretching beyond the borders of Canaan. Through them, the promise that Abraham would be the father of many nations found new expression, rippling outward like water spreading from a spring in the desert. Abraham watched them grow with pride and wisdom. He saw the strength in their arms, the intelligence in their eyes, the way they gazed upon the horizon as if destiny itself was calling them eastward. He knew that the same God who had guided him under the stars now guided them toward new lands. So he taught them, not merely in the ways of herding or trade, but in the fear of the Lord. At night, around the fires, he told them of the voice that once spoke to him in yore, of the covenant sealed in the light of heaven, of the mercy that had carried him through famine, battle, and loss. And as he spoke, Keturah sat quietly beside him, her face lit by the glow of the flames, her heart swelling with quiet reverence. This was her portion, to see her children marked not by wealth, but by divine remembrance. The sons of Keturah learned early that the world was wide and wild. Beyond the fertile hills of Canaan lay endless dunes and unclaimed lands, where only the strong and the faithful could endure. When the time came, Abraham gave each of them gifts, treasures of silver and gold, herds and camels, a father's provision for their journey. And then, with a heavy but understanding heart, he sent them eastward. It was not rejection, but obedience, for he knew that Isaac carried the covenant promise, and the inheritance of the land must remain with him. Yet through Keturah's sons, the blessing itself would travel, expanding beyond borders, scattering seeds of promise among distant peoples. The farewell was tender. The camp stirred early that morning, the sky still pale with dawn. Keturah stood at the edge of the encampment, her veil fluttering softly in the breeze as she watched her sons mount their camels. Abraham's gaze lingered long on each of them, a father's silent prayer written in his eyes. He raised his staff and blessed them one by one, his voice trembling but resolute. "May the Lord who called me guide you. May his light be your compass, and his mercy your shelter. Carmago. My sons, fill the earth as he has commanded, and remember the name of your father Abraham. They bowed before him, their eyes glistening, and turned their faces toward the east. The sun rose behind them like a golden crown. As the caravan began to move, a river of camels and men shimmering across the sands, Keturah's heart swelled with both pride and ache. She knew this was the way of destiny, blessings that must scatter to multiply. And though the distance would stretch far between them, the bond of faith would remain. From that day forward, the tents of Keturah's sons became landmarks across the desert. From the valleys of Midian to the plains near Arabia, they traded in gold, myrrh, and incense. Their names found their way into the songs of wanderers and the scrolls of kings. Even generations later, when strangers spoke of the sons of the East, they spoke of the descendants of Abraham and Keturah, of men whose wisdom and wealth filled the ancient world. And somewhere amid the sands, as the years rolled on, the whispers of prophecy stirred. For from among Keturah's line, through Midian, would one day come the family of Zipporah, the woman who would wed Moses, deliverer of Israel. Thus, even in hidden ways, the hand of God was weaving Keturah's legacy into the unfolding story of redemption. Back in Hebron, Abraham and Keturah sat beneath the stars once more. The camp was quieter now, fewer voices, fewer footsteps, but in that silence, there was peace. Abraham looked up at the constellations and smiled faintly. He had sent his sons eastward, yet he knew God's promise had gone with them. The covenant remained with Isaac, but the blessing had become a river, flowing from one faithful heart into many lands. And Keturah, resting beside him, understood that her life, though quiet, often overlooked, had become the bridge between what was promised and what was fulfilled. Through her, the nations were born. The air over Hebron had grown gentler, the sun softer on Abraham's weathered skin. The patriarch's strength had begun to fade, yet his mind remained sharp, his spirit as clear as the morning light. He had lived through promises and peril, through laughter and loss, and now, in the quiet years, his heart was at peace. Beside him, Keturah moved with grace, her steps measured, her presence steady. She had stood by him through the birth of 6 sons, through seasons of plenty and silence alike. The years had added silver to her hair, but not weariness to her soul. She was a woman of peace, one who understood that divine blessings do not compete, they complete. Around their tent, the camp still hummed with life. Isaac would come often, bringing Rebekah and their servants, staying 4 days to sit at his father's side. The bond between them was tender, a covenant link that neither distance nor time could weaken. Keturah greeted Isaac with honor, never bitterness. She knew that Isaac was the son of promise, chosen long before she came into Abraham's life, and she rejoiced that through him, God's covenant would endure. As Abraham's body weakened, his mind turned toward the future. He knew the time was drawing near, the time when his name would pass fully into the hands of his descendants. And so, he called his household together. Servants came, flocks were counted, scrolls unrolled. The tent stirred with solemn expectation. Abraham, leaning on his staff, spoke softly but with authority, the same tone that once commanded armies and built altars to the Most High. To Isaac, my son, he said, belongs the inheritance of the covenant, the land that God promised me, the blessing sealed beneath the stars. Through him, the name of Abraham shall live forever. Isaac bowed deeply, tears in his eyes, humbled by the weight of divine promise. Then Abraham turned toward Keturah's sons. They stood tall, weathered by the sun and strong from their journeys eastward. Each one bore the mark of leadership, their eyes steady, their hands firm, their hearts shaped by their father's faith. To you, my sons, Abraham continued, the Lord has given his goodness. Though your inheritance is not in this land, the promise is not diminished. It is scattered, that many nations may rise. Go and prosper in the lands the Lord has opened before you. From the treasure tents, he gave them gifts, silver, gold, and fine spices, tokens of abundance to begin their own legacies. He did not send them away empty. For love does not forget even those not chosen for covenant. But the divine order had to be kept. The promise God made on Mount Moriah, the covenant of the stars and sand, would flow through Isaac's line alone. Keturah stood silently beside him, her heart calm. Some might have felt sorrow or envy, but she did not. She understood that God's promises, though unequal in appearance, are equal in purpose through her children. The blessing of Abraham would stretch across the deserts and the mountains, just as God intended. Her role was not to compete with Sarah's memory, but to complete the picture of God's promise that Abraham would indeed be the father of many nations. As the distribution ended, Abraham's eyes softened with affection. He called each son by name, laid his hands upon their heads, and spoke blessings that flowed like oil. May the Lord multiply your seed. May he make your tents fruitful, your paths prosperous, your hands blessed in battle, and your hearts faithful in peace. Tears shimmered in the eyes of the sons as they embraced their father. They had learned from him the strength of obedience and the cost of faith, and though their inheritance would carry them far away, they would never forget the man who taught them to walk with God. That evening, the camp grew still. The sun sank behind the western hills, casting long golden shadows over the tents. Abraham sat outside his dwelling, gazing at the horizon. Keturah joined him, sitting quietly beside his chair. Neither spoke for a long time. They didn't need to. The years had bound them beyond words. Finally, Abraham broke the silence. "Do you see the stars, Keturah?" he asked softly. She looked up. The night sky stretched endlessly above them, glittering with ancient light. "Yes, my lord," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "When I was young, the Lord told me that my descendants would be as these. I thought I understood, but now I see. The promise was larger than I imagined. Even those who go east carry the light of his word." Keturah nodded, her eyes glistening. "You have done all that he commanded you," she said, "and through your obedience, even the nations will know his name." Abraham's hand found hers, frail, warm, unwavering. The desert wind whispered through the tents like a lullaby. The patriarch had lived a full measure of faith, and now, peace wrapped around him like a mantle. The legacy was secure, the divisions righteous, the blessing complete. As the stars watched over them, Keturah knew that their story would not end in this camp, nor in these hills. For faith, once kindled, never dies. It only passes its flame to those who come after. And in that quiet, under the eternal canopy of heaven, Abraham and Keturah sat side by side, to lives intertwined by grace, bound by destiny, resting in the will of God. Years passed, and the tents of Abraham grew quieter. The great patriarch, once the center of endless movement and divine encounters, now lived in the serene twilight of his years. Yet beside him, Keturah remained, steadfast, wise, and full of quiet grace. She cared for him with a devotion that spoke not of youthful passion, but of sacred companionship. Together, they watched the sun rise and set over the same desert sands that had once echoed with the footsteps of angels. When Abraham's time came to join his ancestors, Keturah stood at the entrance of their tent, her face calm yet full of sorrow. She had known this moment would come, that the man she loved was destined for the eternal rest of those who walk closely with God. Isaac came from afar to bury his father beside Sarah. In the cave of Machpelah, Ishmael too appeared, older and quieter, and for a brief moment, both sons stood united in grief. Keturah remained in the background, her eyes lowered, her heart heavy, yet at peace. She knew Abraham's story was greater than any single life. It was the unfolding of a divine covenant written into the very destiny of nations. After his burial, Keturah returned to her own tents, surrounded by her sons, Zimran, Jokshan, Madon, Midian, Ishbak, and Shuah. Though their father's inheritance had gone to Isaac, Keturah taught them to walk in humility and to honor the memory of Abraham. Each morning, she would remind them of the God of their father, the one who called him from Ur, who promised him descendants more numerous than the stars. "Never forget," she would say, "that your father's God is the Lord of all nations. His promise is not small, and his mercy reaches far." Her words took root deeply in their hearts. The sons of Keturah spread eastward, settling in lands that would later become centers of trade and wisdom. Among them rose tribes and kingdoms, their tents stretching from Arabia to the deserts near Midian.
Some would become merchants, carrying incense, spices, and gold along the ancient routes that connected civilizations. Others would become warriors and builders, shaping regions that the world would later know as the lands of the East. Through them, the name of Abraham lived on, not as a single bloodline, but as a river branching into many directions, watering the earth with blessing. Keturah lived long enough to see her sons prosper. Though her story fades quietly in Scripture, her influence burned bright in every generation that followed. She was not like Sarah, whose laughter marked the miracle of Isaac, yet she was no less chosen. Through her, God revealed a deeper mystery, that His blessings cannot be confined to one tent, one tribe, or one people. His covenant was meant to overflow, touching nations through even the quiet and hidden vessels of His will. In her final years, Keturah often sat beneath the stars Abraham had once counted. The desert wind would whisper through the palm trees, and she would lift her face toward heaven, remembering the promise that had shaped both her husband's life and her own. The God who gives life to the barren, she would whisper, has filled the earth with His promise. When she finally passed away, her sons buried her in the same land their father had loved, near the paths Abraham once walked with God. And though history may not echo her name as loudly as Sarah's, heaven remembered her as the woman who carried the last chapter of Abraham's earthly story. Centuries later, when prophets spoke of God's faithfulness, they saw in Abraham's life a pattern that extended far beyond Israel, a pattern that began again with Keturah's children. From their distant lands came wise men, kings, and travelers seeking light. They too carried echoes of that ancient blessing spoken to Abraham. In you shall all the nations of the earth be blessed. And so Keturah's legacy endures, not in monuments or scrolls, but in the silent evidence of God's promise fulfilled. She reminds us that even those who appear in the margins of Scripture can carry eternal purpose. Through her, the story of faith stretches beyond the familiar, into the wide, waiting world where God's covenant continues to flow like a river without end. Thank you for watching. God bless you.